afternoon or morning, Floodgate family, depending where we're catching you. And thank you for taking the time and joining us for this Floodgate live event. You know, today I think is going to be a special day because we're going to learn about something about leading in a VUCA environment. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's volatility, that's uncertainty, that's complexity, it's ambiguity. All of those sound kind of familiar right now? If not, you haven't been living on this planet through 2020 and this today. So I think we're all learning to lead in those kind of VUCA environment, which was coined by the military. And so it's fitting that we have joining us here retired Lieutenant Colonel Dave O'Hearn, who can, led in the VUCA environments. Now, Dave is a Special Forces operator. Had 6 combat tours, multiple international tours outside, global tours outside of that. Led several commands of A teams of Joint Special Operations Forces. So has really had tremendous impact. Is winner of multiple Bronze Stars, not just one, multiple, and a Purple Heart. So Dave, first and foremost, thank you so much for your service. Thank you also for the time and allowing us to learn a little bit from you. And I gave you a little bit of introduction there, but I know everyone on here would like to know a little bit. We would like to know a little bit about you and your background in training. Dave, do we have you?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So pleasure to be here and to chat with you guys. Like Joe said, I retired as a lieutenant colonel after 22 years of service in the U.S. Army, with the bulk of my experience working as a U.S. Army Green Beret. During my time in service, I had the privilege to lead and serve from some of the smallest tactical elements, such as the Special Forces A-Team, to large operational and in some large strategic organizations like U.S. Special Operations Command. And while serving, I deployed 6 times for combat between Afghanistan and Iraq, and another half dozen times to other areas around the world. These deployments were certainly the highlights of my career and made the greatest impact to shaping my character and worldview today.
Yeah, excellent. Well, and I'm sure all of those operations, were in VUCA environments, and so the leaders today that we're talking to in MedTech find themselves in that kind of environment. So what are some of the key leadership techniques, that you've used to navigate during those times to move forward?
Well, first I want to underscore kind of an important leadership characteristic kind of before I directly answer that question. Because when I assume a role as a leader, whether it's in combat or if it's as a project lead in the office, like my approach never changes. It's always the same. Principally, it's this belief of personal responsibility. And I don't think that we can have a basic discussion on leadership kind of really without addressing it first. So really in every role, I knowingly accept kind of this mantle of responsibility, both for success and failure, with the understanding that I'll be the one who's held accountable, regardless of the outcomes. And therefore, like, I always agree to a standard of ownership. And I'm sure many of you have heard this term from other people from the special operations community who, speak globally in leadership. But I always agree to the standard of ownership that prevents me from really deflecting criticism or blaming another. And what it does is it focuses me on the critical roles that I play within the team. But with that being said, uncertain and complex environments are actually where special operators thrive. We're specially selected and trained to operate in gray areas. And in fact, we have a term that defines the places that we work, and we call those gray zones, interestingly enough. So we do we work in gray areas, and so we might as well just call them gray zones, and that's where competition right. really occurs. But to successfully navigate those challenges in that volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment, and I never heard the term VUCA until I looked it up. And I was like, okay, well, that's,
it was coined by the military, but maybe business uses it more than now.
Yeah, I would say that the military comes up with so many acronyms. This is one that I had not heard before.
There you go. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
But to successfully navigate it, and this sounds really cliche, but it's so true and it's so simple, is that you've got to simply adapt and survive. And human history teaches us this fundamental truth, and it's what I believe is really the ultimate competitive edge, not only on the battlefield but also in business and life. And if I want to break it down to that adapt and survive and kind of assign a trait to it, I would call that adaptability and survivability. And so I think that to further kind of unpack this, I need to put a little bit more meat on the bone to that statement of like, okay, what do you mean when you say, adapt and survive? Because there's got to be some practicality to it, right? Other than just kind of saying it, especially as it relates to leadership. And as I mentioned before, this is why I kind of wanted to, preface this. Leaders need to take ownership of that success and failure. And though owning success is sweet, I do believe that owning failures and admitting faults can produce opportunities to become a better human. And adaptability in this case is really about learning. And the greatest leaders, especially in the face of uncertainty, like we're talking about, will have the humility to kind of listen to advice, to take criticism, to admit faults, and then change for the better. And so when things get tough, good leaders will make the necessary adjustments to keep the organization moving forward. And in combat, especially from my experiences, very few of my operations went according to plan. The plans did not, as people say, survive first contact, right? Like no plan survives first contact. And it's true, but in order to continue to advance on the enemy, sometimes in the face of like seemingly impossible odds, and then you can look at it, you could parallel that with life, to kind of achieve success, the plan needs to be adjusted. You got to move left, you got to move right. And yet there's much more to just being adaptable than just doing something different. Because people are like, well, we can adapt, we shift left, we shift right. Okay, well, I think it's a little bit more than just doing something different. And I think that my team's effectiveness was essentially determined by what we did as an organization before the environment became volatile. And so like in the years and the months leading up to those moments, our ability to adapt was built into the culture of the organization. From the talent we recruited, the talent we retained, to the hard work and discipline that was drilled every single day, really to be experts in our craft until it was a part of who we are. And one more thing that I want you to take note of is that even though I said adapt and survive, I didn't mean adapt to survive. I purposely intended for those two things to be adaptability and survivability, to remain separate and distinct characteristics. But they're definitely complementary when you're facing adversity, especially in uncertain environments. And one of the things that I kind of want to maybe discuss a minute is like a little bit of my training before I kind of talk to you about the survivability piece, because I think that's also crucial to the survival piece. Because as a soldier, all the military education we attend incorporates leadership as a component of the curriculum. And in fact, at every stage of your career, you're required to attend training that prepares you for the next level of leadership, because every soldier has got to be prepared to take charge. But I'll give you two examples. For me, there are two particular training opportunities that stick out among many that impacted how I view leadership. And they include the Ranger training course, which is it's primarily a combat leader school, believe it or not. It's not just teaching you how to be a great tactician. It's actually built as a combat leader school. And the other, which is not a leadership school, but certainly taught me very valuable lessons was survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Because I was given significant level of responsibility in that opportunity, as in the role of the senior ranking officer kind of in that scenario. But both of those things, when I look back at it, were some of the most difficult things that I've done, both like mentally and emotionally, and that's in training. That's take the combat piece out of it. Yeah. That's just preparing for that. But I mentioned these two schools because there's like this common factor that I want to zero in on because the stress I experienced mentally, emotionally, physically was immense and sometimes very overwhelming. And it was in those circumstances that I needed to lead others and make decisions that in a real world situation would have like serious consequences. And these experiences taught me a tremendous lesson in humility because not every decision is clean or right. And sometimes it's about making one bad choice over another. But the one characteristic I'd say that got me through those difficult tests was being mentally tough. And I think that's the one common defining trait that I can identify that all special operators have, is that they're resilient, they never quit, even when the task or decision seems impossible. And I think that's true for anyone who's successful in life. And consequently, it's also one of the most important things that I try to teach my children, is mental toughness, And so I think it's a good question for leaders to understand is how to build mental toughness in themselves, in their organization, in their teams. And I want to say this too, is that toughness is not necessarily the suppression of feeling or emotion either. People think, being mentally tough is just being able to push everything down and be able to drive through it. Yeah. Right. But it's about moving forward despite my feelings or emotions. It's okay to have them. It's good to not be callous or cold, because I think leaders should also have empathy. And so one of the things that I want you to take note of, like when I was talking about the survivability piece, I wanted to talk about
correct. That. Yeah. No, that empathetic.
Putting the meat on that, is that mental toughness is what got me through those difficult times. And, and because it is one of those common traits, I also believe it's the one common trait that enables people to keep moving forward, despite their circumstances.
And that's a crucial thing. That's a crucial thing. That step forward, even in those tough things. You brought on a lot of things here, so I'm gonna take a second, really quick, and unpack a few things I heard. By the way, guys, if you put a comment in the section, we're gonna take some comments on the end. So you have a question, put some a note in the comment section. We'll be able to pull them up. We'll address it. Dave's got a lot of good ideas. So I know you have some concepts, and he's brought some massive things. I think the first thing I thought was interesting, you said, if I heard you, it's that ownership, right? That locus of control as a leader ends with you, and you have to have that extreme ownership mentality, which I think probably then, if I heard you right, gives you that humility, because if that you have to control it, you can't blame others, and there's going to be mistakes. So that's going to naturally give you humility to be able to adapt effectively and not to survive, in this scenario. But that adaptation comes through a lot of practice, right? Before you're actually in a real VUCA environment. So yes. Creating that team, that training, that lessons before the quote unquote crap hits the fan, because when that happens, it's too late, And then the last thing I heard you say is you combine all of that with a group that's mentally tough, which doesn't mean non-emotional. It's being able to move forward as a human, even through great emotion. Did I kind of capture absolutely. A lot of that? You kind of try to unpack that correctly?
Perfectly sum that up. Yes.
No, there was just a ton of great nuggets in there. So I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to try to, for my own sake, one of those things and capture it here mentally myself, because, hey, sure. I'm going to use this stuff. So that's awesome. Hey, you mentioned a lot of the things you have to do, and things, but what are some of the common leadership mistakes you might have seen from either commanders or maybe someone led you or whatever? Where have you seen, as the most common leadership mistakes people make?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that good leaders must always be personally involved or engaged with their teammates. And that's being personally involved ensures that you and they really are prepared for every task. So we talked about this preparedness, right? That kind of builds adaptability, and they do this by providing, I think, guidance and intent. So like, this, vision, purpose, whatever you want to label it. They do it by providing essential tools and resources, for their teammates to effectively work. And they also do it by managing risk. And it all goes back to what we talked about with the personal responsibility. So when we talk about leadership and personal responsibility, like, to me, those are kind of the three things that a leader really truly does for his team. But I think a common mistake is when leaders become complacent, which results in passivity. Because consequently, passive leaders become kind of too hands off, or they're not available, or maybe they don't care. I don't know what the motivation is, but really it ultimately results in a lack of communication, with regard to that guidance or intent or mentorship. The team is usually may not be given, or empowered with the right resources or authorities that they need to do their job. And risk oftentimes is not mitigated to an acceptable or right level, and so people become frozen, right? Because they're like, we don't know what to do. Risk may be too high, but we don't know. And so when things get difficult or the environment becomes dynamic and there's a lot of uncertainty, I think that it manifests as chaos. And leaders in those moments will exercise a level of unhealthy control at that point, on two ends of a spectrum. Either they'll disappear, asserting absolutely no control, which contributes to that chaos, right? Or they begin to kind of overly manage the team. You've heard the term micromanagement, right? They're really asserting too much control, because there's probably a lack of trust. They don't know their people. And so I think complacency dovetails into passivity and becomes a barrier to adaptive, flexible thinking and execution. And of course, those who have great teams built around them that carry most of the load, others will step up and take charge in the absence of good leadership and make those in charge look good. So it doesn't always fail, right? Especially if you have a good team built around you.
Right.
Definitely not a culture that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? A lot of people will say, well, I don't like micromanagers, and so people think on the other side, good leadership means being disengaged, right? But that's not the case. It's engagement, but engagement through empowerment, right? It's not, hey, do these 5 tasks. Did you do them right? Let me check over your shoulder. No, you didn't do the. It's here's the commander's intent. How do you go? What do you need to get there? Are you okay to get there? Check it back in. I'm right alongside you. So when those problems occur, it's a communication, so they're comfortable, right? So it is that balance, that I could imagine, especially, when you literally are taking the hill, it's a lot more necessary to have that trust and direction, but empowerment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, leadership is hands-on. It's not, like you said, you don't disengage. And to me, leadership is a relationship, between me and the team, and it's about always working to ensure that the team around me is prepared for anything. That's my responsibility, is giving them the tools and preparing them for what is to come so that they can accomplish that purpose that you lay out. And I think what you do every single day as a leader in that aspect will impact, your response when things get tough. There's a saying that I like that says, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so I think it's true with regards to leadership. So how you lead every day when crisis comes is also going to be how you lead when crisis comes. Yeah,
it's true. You go back, more likely to go back to your muscle memory. So
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of the so one thing, today, right? And we're seeing this as people are either, emerging from COVID or we're getting the second surge is, there's fear, right? People are scared in different levels, scared of business, scared of making a new product choice, scared of getting back out. But that creates inaction. So I know That was always, going out in the field had to be scary, right? I don't care who you are. So how do you get people to overcome that, move to their objective that we know is necessary, even in the face of risk?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, this question, because I think this is a great question to kind of wrap up, even just package even more what we just talked about. And so to kind of give that general summary again, because I think it exactly answers this question, is how do you move forward? Is that fear and inaction is a result of complacency, which I just mentioned, right? It's that general trend of passivity, and it's a lack of preparedness, not having the right tools for the task. And that includes all of those things a leader is responsible for, which we talked about. And so practically speaking, the degree to which we can overcome challenges I think is directly impacted by, one, the degree of discipline we have to build adaptability through hard work every day. And two, I think it's impacted by the courage we have to push boundaries regularly that make us resilient and tough, which we talked about. It goes back to that adaptability and piece. I think that is how you overcome obstacles that keep you from moving to the objective. I think the simplest way to sum that up is hard work and determination. I mean, it sounds so simple. It doesn't require hard.
These aren't easy things, but it's not hard. I heard you say that it's not hard work and determination at that moment. It's you have trust within the organization. They're supported. They're prepared, right? So even in these bad and you know what? They have a true team, and so people will collectively do more than they ever could do on themselves, right? Absolutely. And so if they take a step forward together through that mental toughness, and you have that true trust and teamwork, and you haven't been complacent, when you step forward, they step with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I heard you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a leader, you have to lead from the front, by example, And you've heard the saying, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army that you want to have. And so everything, as far as success is concerned, is built before. You can't expect the crisis to happen and then now, I think we need to change the culture. The culture is built before the crisis, and so I think that's important. So
right. Yeah. And I think if we look, some of the businesses that unfortunately failed during this time or have failed, we're already, we can arguably, if you probably did a post-mortem, we're probably already weak, right? And, weren't able to sustain it. So not always, right? There's definitely scenarios, but probably has more of an indication. Last question for you here. Take some from the Floodgate family. So guys, if you have questions, put them in the comment section. We'll read them here for you and have Dave give some of those. Who is your favorite leader? You've had probably a lot of great leaders, and most importantly, why?
So, I mentioned how every person in the military is trained for that next leadership position, right? The next level. You're always training for that level of responsibility. And surprisingly, when I thought about this or thinking about it, my favorite leader isn't necessarily somebody that led me as much as it was somebody that I had the opportunity to lead. I had a team sergeant. We call him a team daddy. He is the senior ranking non-commissioned officer on the team. Who was, we were a command team together, even though I was over, responsible for the whole team. And he was really kind of the second in command. Like, to watch him lead the men of our team was fascinating, because he emulated everything that we just talked about, and it wasn't just like in times of crisis. It was the everyday, mundane, basic things that we would do back in the team room, from personnel actions to physical training to going to the range to all of those things. Like, he cared so much about the guys and their preparedness, and he cared about them personally. And he understood their strengths and their weaknesses. And so when things went really bad, everybody was able to focus on their job because of the way he pushed us to perform prior to, deployment or to a crisis or whatever it is. So his name was Harold King. We're still good friends today, but a really, really great guy.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love the story that your favorite leader was a guy you led, and watching him lead was the inspiration and pushed you, so it doesn't, it's a bi-directional. Leaders can go up. Leadership doesn't always have to flow down, and I think that's a good lesson for everybody in this call that has bosses, which is all of us, right? So,
and if you breed that culture of, if there's a culture of high performing people, they're always going to be pushing themselves to that next level. It's not just the guy at the team who's trying to bring everybody up to his level. Oftentimes it's the guys who are, under him that are pushing him higher, because he's forced to work and be high performing.
Right. Yeah. If you're, a lot of executives I've heard said, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I've already failed. Right. Yeah. We did something wrong. So, well, good. Hey, I know we have some questions here. We'll take some questions from the Floodgate family. Again, guys, put it in the comments here. Let's see. We got some questions here. We got a couple, thank you for the service there, Dave. So we got that, sharing the insights and leadership. So we got a couple comments on those that people were looking for. And then here's one that came up. What's the number one piece of advice you give a leader who's struggling to perform during this time? Just, I guess the one thing, right? That we gave a bunch, but if there's one thing you want to leave them with, what would that be?
I'm going to pick the ownership piece. If your team is struggling, the only thing you can do is look at yourself and say, okay, what is it that I have failed to do to provide this team what is necessary to perform well? And by owning it, I say, hey, we're at where we are because of me. And then that's where it comes to that admitting that fault and saying, okay, we're here. What do we need to do to get back on course and then steer the ship right? Rather than kind of trying to look for the scapegoat, So own it, change course, make it right. Yeah. No, that is an awesome suggestion, because once you control it and you're not pointing your finger at somebody else, it's a lot easier to assess what can I do to make that different, right? Yeah. So, I think you might have touched on this, but this is the second question: is the best leadership lesson you learned while in the military? Best leadership lesson. There's a lot that I mentioned. I think all of those are good leadership lessons that I've learned. For me, I'm naturally not a outgoing person. I'll say that. And so I'm not a people person, and I think that what I've had to learn as a leader is that, like, I have to become a people person. But I think that's where the kind of the mental toughness, and I think that the survivability piece comes in. It's like, no, but I'll do whatever it takes to do it right. And so I will learn how to lead and being with that real, hands-on, getting to know my guys, having empathy kind of experience. Those are the things that I've had to that I've learned the most being a leader in the military. Because I've learned that if you want to lead, like, you've got to be hands-on. You've got to be in it with them. You've got to become a people person, because it is certainly a relationship. It's not. Yeah. When you look at, it's not like the industrial age where it's assembly line and the boss is up in the office just looking down and all he cares about is the numbers. No, it's definitely got to get down there and working and know what the problems are, and make the adjustments as necessary. Yeah, no, it's so true. Think about companies, think about armies, you think about whatever. All we are collections of people. That's it. So that relationship, the strength of that, the motivation of that, the ingenuity of that group of people, it makes you Apple or Kodak, right? So it's great lessons, Dave. I appreciate you taking the time to share these with us, give us this insight. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for your time.
And Floodgate family, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.